Welcome, everyone, to episode 59 of Kowalski Analysis. I can't even believe I've made this many podcasts. I'm so proud of myself. But this podcast is designed to help you navigate the weight and become the best version of yourself. And I'm your host, Rabbi Kowalski. Today, I will be speaking with America's Rabbi, Daniel Lapin. He is a best-selling author. He's a speaker. He's a marriage coach, and he's a TV host who immigrated to the United States from South Africa after studying in Israel and the United Kingdom. Newsweek magazine called him one of America's most influential rabbis. His weekly podcast regularly ranks in Apple's top 5 podcasts, and his entrepreneur training programs have brought prosperity and business success to more than 10,000 achievers. With his wife, Susan, he hosts the daily TCT television show, Ancient Jewish Wisdom. And in a typical year, he addresses over 50,000 people in live appearances on his famous 5F rejuvenation program, which we'll talk about, focusing on family, finances, friendship, faith, and fitness. So I am very excited to talk to him. I'm excited because he's going to have a lot of knowledge to share with us. So before we jump into it, let me just quickly mention my sponsor. As always, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. And that is my first sponsor is Mr. Micah Hughes, close personal friend of mine that's been sponsoring the podcast for over a year. And he helps people achieve financial peace through real estate investing. So whether you want to buy a home, maybe you have a home that you want to sell, or maybe you just want to get into real estate investing, please give Micah a call. He'll take good care of you. 443-532-8450, or you can email him at micahhughes@mundalconsulting.com. And my second sponsor, thank you for being patient, is Advisors Mortgage, and they're new. And they have a highly competitive pricing structure coupled with our state-of-the-art technology. They are second to none in their commitment to guiding you through the home buying and refinancing process. Actually, Micah works with Advisors Mortgage, so it's a great partnership. You can call Adrian White directly, and he's a City Fan member. We just went bowling last weekend, and his number is 610-999-3448, or you can visit his website at awhite.advisorsmortgage.com. All right. No further ado, let's bring in the rabbi. Hey, Rabbi.
Rob, hello.
How are you?
Couldn't be better. Thank you. How about you?
I'm doing well. I found out when I was preparing for this that you're in Maryland.
That is correct. Yes. I was struck because I see a lot of your work is in Baltimore.
Yes, that's where we're based out of. Where are you at?
In Pikesville.
Pikesville. You're super close.
Yeah, awesome. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So how long have you been living in the States?
Oh, in the United States, 40 years. I came as a youngster. Yeah.
Okay, great. Awesome. So we'd like to do a little something that we call this or that before we jump into the conversation. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions and you just tell me which of the two things that you prefer. So bagels or latkes?
Both.
You have to pick one.
Depends when.
Okay. What if you only could have one for the rest of your life? What would you have?
Bagels.
Okay. See the future or change the past?
Seeing the future would be too painful. Changing the past, it's very difficult.
Would you say neither?
I'd say neither, yeah.
Yeah. Because if you change the past, then you would become a different person.
It's too open-ended.
Okay. Be a prophet or be a king?
Oh, king for sure.
Yeah, prophets weren't very well respected, were they? Or listened to?
Well, prophets end up dead very often, and that's as true today as at any time.
Yeah, they only get honored after the fact. Yeah. That's so true. Okay, stability or excitement?
Stability.
Okay, chicken or fish?
To eat?
Yes, fish. Okay, great. Thank you for participating in that. Yeah, I'm just excited to dive in. I was watching a bunch of your interviews. I saw you on the 700 Club, been listening to your podcast, and just really excited to talk to you. So there's a lot of singles that follow me and listen to this show, and I really wanted to start there with just advice for singles these days. I know the culture out there is really crazy that we're living in, and super challenging for people that really want to find love and not participate in the hookup culture. Right. So I heard that there was a teaching in the Talmud. Did I pronounce that right? Talmud?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it said that 40 days before someone is born, God decides who they will marry. Do you believe that God predestines marriage?
That would be not a very good translation of what it actually says. And Robert, what's so critically important about this is because for all the folks who follow you, and I know it's a big audience, and I know many of them are single people who are looking forward to being part of a committed pair, it's really important to obliterate the Hollywood model that somehow, somewhere in this vast world, is the one woman or the one man who's just the right person. They are your destined soulmate, and your mission in life is to find them. This is unadulterated bilge water. This is complete and utter nonsense. People not only waste their lives, but even often destroy their lives on this particular piece of mythology. And as well as I do, how many movies we could list whose plot line absolutely hinges. Just before the marriage, there's a big interference and interruption, and the destined guy shows up and everything is saved, the right person. This is just hugely damaging, because the truth is, and here's my problem. My problem is that I have to convey very complex things, and you have the same problem as I do. We are talking about complex areas of human interaction. These things are more complicated than a nuclear power station. Honest to goodness, I can explain to you the workings of a nuclear power station. I can even tell you what went wrong and what didn't go wrong in the Japan tsunami and the Fukuyama power station. I can do that easily. That's a lot easier than talking about male-female interaction. But if I start with the bottom line is that a man who is the right man will find the right woman. And what's more, it could be any one of 10,000 women and would just be fine in every one of those cases. But the issue is not, and I hear this from guys all the time, so cut it out, guys. I don't want to hear this. I will get married when I find the right girl. Rubbish. Rubbish.
I've said that.
You are going to end up marrying the wrong girl when you suddenly find yourself too weary to go on another date. You will marry when you are the right man, not when you find the right girl.
That's good. No, I definitely believe you attract what you are. I've, talked about that at length, but I guess I've seen so many people have bad marriages and it just ends, they get into something, they're not happy, and then maybe they stay in it, or maybe it just ends in a mess.
What do you find is the cause of a bad marriage?
I believe it's because they got physical and they get a soul tie. They get that oxytocin release and then they get stuck to the wrong person. So here's my fear, and I've talked about this before. So now I'm committed to waiting until marriage, really mostly to please God, but also because I do think it will help me choose the right person with a clear head. Yes, but I'm like, God forbid I get into a marriage. We have sex, and then all of a sudden I realized maybe I wasn't as interested as I thought I was. So I'm really almost, I don't want to say I'm waiting to be sure. I am definitely waiting for God to give me that check in my spirit. I feel like I have good discernment. I don't know if I believe in necessarily one. I could see with that many people in the world how there could be 10,000 that you could make it work with.
And it's amazing how similarly all those marriages will work out in the end, regardless of which one you marry. And that's because of the different roles of male and female within a marriage.
I had a woman on my podcast last week. Her name is Jackie Dorman, and she interviewed all these people that had successful marriages, and every single one of them, the common denominator was that they got married within 4 months of meeting each other. Every one of them. So it supports what you're saying, where it doesn't.
No, I know. Yeah, I know that line, and it's absolutely right. When I talk to women who will talk to me and say, "I'm dating this guy for 5 years now," and I say, as a father of daughters, I could not be more miserable than I am at having heard that.
Yeah. So becoming the right person, I guess I wanted to ask you that. You said when you're the right person, you'll attract the right person. So what kind of work does that involve?
Great question. It means in shorthand, and then we'll fill it out. In shorthand, it means becoming masculine, becoming everything that a man should be. However, these days, you've got to be very careful because there are so many varying definitions of what a man should be. If we played the game you played with me when we started, would you rather your daughter marries a man who's sensitive or a man who's ambitious if you had to choose?
Oh, most women are going to probably say ambitious, I would imagine.
You're 100%. That is exactly what almost every woman will say. Yeah, exactly. And they'd be right. They'd be exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think the key thing is not to follow the popular culture on this. As a matter of fact, I'm generalizing, and one always has to be careful, but to the extent that a generalization retains some value, I would say that almost anything the popular culture says, go 180 degrees in the other direction, you'll go better off. So being, definitely ambitious. I would say that if you are not yet financially successful, and again, that is a wide range, what financially successful means. So let me just reduce it to its basics. If you are not yet able to afford a place to live, and a place that would be satisfactory for you and a wife to live in, you don't actually have to have moved into it yet, but if you can't afford it, rent or own, I don't care, although I'd prefer own, but rent is also okay. If you can't do that, and you can't afford a decent car, by which I mean to say it doesn't have to be new, it can be last year or 2 years ago, but a decent quality car that's going to be reliable, then you have no business dating. You're wasting everyone's time.
I love it. Hey, Rob Kowalski here. When I first got serious about living intentionally and becoming a better version of myself, I found a major shortage of things to do and people to do them with. And it was the loneliness and boredom that led me to starting CityFam. So I just want to take a moment right now and encourage you to go over and join the CityFam Facebook community. It's a free Facebook group, and in it you'll find purpose-driven people from all over the world that want to enjoy life to the fullest. You can search it on Facebook, or you can go to www.friendswithbetterbenefits.com and it'll take you right there. While I'm mentioning it, if you're single, searching for real love, love before sex, as I like to say, I want to encourage you to join the Waiting Works community. That's another free Facebook group I put together designed to help people wait well, date well, and ultimately hit the mark in life and love. And you can go to www.reallovewaits.com and I'll see you over there. Now back to the episode. This is actually in my book. It says, observe the masses and do the opposite. That was a quote by James Caan.
I knew we'd find much to agree on.
Yeah, no, you're right. If everybody else is, that's probably the wrong thing. So I believe what you said. And that's why, so I've dated very little in the last 10 years, literally probably been on like 10 dates, or no, maybe 5 dates in 10 years. But it's because my finances weren't right. I was building this thing that God, I believe, led me to build, and it just didn't make money. And I was like, I just didn't feel like, I was already busy and I was broke, and I'm like, and then I'm going to add a girl into this mix. I'm like, that ain't going to work. Yeah. And even if you look back to Adam and Eve, and I've discussed this before, is like Adam didn't get Eve right away. A lot of people think that they were created at the same time, and Adam got a job first. Yes, so if you're living in your mom's basement, you need to be a provider. And that goes back to ancient Jewish tradition, where if a man was going to marry a woman, he would go away and then like build a house and a place for them, and then he would come back and get her when he had his.
Again, it's more philosophical than factual, meaning you don't necessarily have to actually do that, but you have to be in a position to be able to.
Right. Provide.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people will say, I'm not in that position, but this girl I'm dating is making plenty money. And so between us, it's going to work. And I say, look, it gives me no pleasure to be a prophet, because I don't want to be a prophet. But let me tell you that if you marry her, your marriage is not long for this world. It's going to be very short-lived. What are you talking about? How can you say that? Because there is a fundamental difference between men and women. Unfortunately, we've had ample experience in the United States since the 1980s. We know that when a region goes through economic stress, Pittsburgh with the collapse of steel, the Northeast with the collapse of industrial and manufacturing, we know that whenever there is an economic collapse, lots of men lose their jobs. And we, more than any other statistic in America, we maintain medical statistics. We know everything about everybody. You can't go and get it by name, but the statistical data is available. And one of the things we know is that when men lose their jobs, they basically become impotent. They lose their sexual function.
Wow.
Absolutely standard. And so we know this. If somebody goes to the doctor with ED, erectile dysfunction, one of the very first questions the doctor will always ask is, tell me about your work. How's your work going? And the doctor knows that very likely it's going to be, hey, I've been laid off, or I'm about to be laid off, or it's not going well. However, with a woman, it has exactly the reverse effect. When women lose their earning capacity, they become more desirable to men, not less desirable. When men lose their earning capacity, they become less desirable, not more desirable. And this is exemplified by a loss of potency and virility. So this is just, unfortunately, a very real fact. And it's why it is that in situations, in marriages where the woman out-earns the husband, the statistical durability of that marriage is measured in months, not years.
Wow. She'll end up resenting you. I could imagine that for sure. So that's funny because what you said about women losing their job and becoming more desirable. So I've had girlfriends that they lived at home with their parents and they were older. They were maybe, some of them were even above 30 maybe. And they're like, they wanted to move out and get an apartment because they were like, no man's going to want me. I live with my parents. And I'm like, look, guys don't care about that. Like for a guy, yeah, if you're a man, you shouldn't be living at home with your mom if you're in your 30s or your parents. But if you're a woman, I almost see it as, it's almost endearing. It's a little sweet. It makes me know that they weren't like a slutty and whatever. It's like you stuck close to your parents. I think that's a beautiful thing. So ladies, if you're out there and you live with your folks, don't go get an apartment. Let that man come and take you away from that house.
Absolutely. In other words, when you show, and this is a test that's done, it's like Psych 101 in every college campus around the country. They show pictures of guys to girls, and under each picture is profession, investment bank executive, bricklayer, everything. And then they ask the girls to rank the guys. And then what they do is they then reverse the occupations. They change them around. And it shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that women see sexual attraction as linked to financial ability. With men, it's exactly the reverse. Men prefer kindergarten teachers to investment bank executives or lawyers.
Yeah. I had on, I think his name was Dr. Bill Harley. I can't think of the book that he wrote right now, but he basically said something along the lines of, if it's a guy and maybe you were trying to introduce him, set him up on a date, he's going to want to see a picture. And if it's a girl, she's going to want to know what he does for a living. Like that's what he said. And it's just truth. We can't get around it.
And there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. I taught my girls, don't let anybody call you a gold digger, because what a man's financial situation tells you a huge amount about that guy.
Right.
It tells you the extent to which he's been able to discipline himself. It tells you whether he's an investor or a spender. It tells you whether there are other people who trust him. A man's financial history is extremely significant. So don't let any woman feel negative about the fact that she is interested in his finances. It's very good that you are. God bless you. You're doing the right thing and your life will be the better for it.
So ladies, ask them to bring their credit report to that first date. Now, so would you go as far as to say that love is just a choice, or do you believe that God still does have some hand in who you choose?
Yeah, no, I think there's no question about it that if you do the right thing, you are a fitting recipient for divine blessing in becoming married. But in addition to that, to answer your question, you asked me if I think love is a choice. And I think it's important. It's a very important thing to identify what love means. For a start, and again, I know that my PR person would say, Lapin, just calm down and spend a few minutes showing that you're an empathetic, compassionate, nice sort of guy. And that's ridiculous, because I do feel for people and I am empathetic, but I haven't got time to pat your tush and wipe your nose. I'd rather tell you the truth, because I don't want anybody listening to me to become a tennis ball floating down the gutter of life. And I'm not here to massage you with warm butter. I'm here to tell you the truth. Now, it's a truth that you're going to reject and it's going to upset you because it goes against your existing feelings. So it's going to cause considerable cognitive dissonance. I'm going to say things. And so here's what I want to say, Rob, is don't believe anything I say. Don't disbelieve it, but just treat it like a scientific experiment. A scientific experiment is verified by obtaining the same results when it's repeated by many different people. That's how you verify a scientific result. And so take what I'm telling you and test it out in the real world in which you live. That's all. See whether the worldview I am painting provides a more accurate explanation for how the world really works, or whether I'm all wet. And so with that sort of caveat, I'll just dive straight in and say that is love a choice? I'm gonna back off a little bit from that and say that if a young woman comes to me and says, and many have, both in my role as a synagogue rabbi, which is long behind me now, but also in my current work in coaching. And she says, I want you to meet this guy I'm hoping to marry. And I say, why do you want to marry? And she'll say, he loves me. And
I love him.
You're a big girl. I just want to tell you one thing, and that is that if you are willing to get married because he loves you, then please know that I will be on his side when you come crying to me in 10 years' time saying he now loves his secretary at the office. Hey, you made this all about love. You made your bed. You were the one who said this is all about love. I don't think that's the basis on which to make a marriage. Oh, we're so in love. Run for your life. I mean, what are you talking about? This is craziness. And you put your finger on it exactly, Rob, when you said a little earlier as to why you recommend abstinence during dating. Because how on earth can you possibly make a wise decision when the most irresistible urge in humanity is at work? It's ridiculous. At a critical moment in a relationship with a female, at a critical moment, she could get me to sign for anything you want. I don't care. I'll say whatever I have to say.
Yeah. When you look at the Bible, it's definitely doesn't make it clear that God is choosing your partner. If anything, it's the opposite, because you think about like Isaac and Rebecca, and there were different people where they just pick somebody, and so much more complicated these days.
And it doesn't have to be, because the thing with love, who's the first person described as loving in the Bible? You mentioned the Bible. Who's the very first person in Genesis who does any loving?
Good question. Was it Adam loved his wife, or no, he knew his wife?
Yeah, doesn't say he loved her. And did Noah love Mrs. Noah? Well, I'm sure they had plenty beautiful, lovely moonlit evenings on that ark, but no, the first time love is used is Abraham for his son. So it's decidedly non-sexual. And yet, when the majority of men say, I love her, what they're really saying is, I want to have sex, because the Hebrew word for love and the Lord's language needs to be examined. And that's why so much ancient Jewish wisdom is embedded within the Hebrew text of the scriptures. And the Hebrew word for love means I give, not I take.
I love that. No, that's because love is sacrifice, right?
And so when you say I love her, my first question is, so what have you done for her lately? I gave her pleasure. Yeah, you know what? Hard to sell me on the idea that was selfless dedication. So what is it you actually did for her? Have you promised to provide for her for the rest of your life and take care of her and protect her? No, you haven't got around to that yet. You don't love her, Val. You love you. You say you love her exactly the way I say I love steak and fries.
Yeah.
If I really loved them, I wouldn't eat them. I'd look after them.
I love that. That's awesome.
And so one has to be very careful. Do I think it's a choice? I do. I think you're right about that. Better than that, I'd even say it's a decision.
So I heard you say something in a podcast where you said happiness is a moral obligation. And I think somebody asked you basically, how can I be happy, or is it possible to be happy while I'm single? And you said something along the lines of, look, if your obligation or what you're supposed to do is throw yourself on the struggle and make sure that your tomorrow is better than your yesterday, I think is what you said. And
by what you do today. Yes.
Yeah, but it's so good. It struck me. And I think that really is it's the trick to managing that, because it's like such a long, and I've been single for a long time. I've been single for 16 of the last 21 years, no sex, barely dating. And it's been super challenging, but
do you meet women, Rob?
I do. There's a lot of women in my world through CityFam. But the last 10 years, I haven't had finances like to support, barely to support myself. So I just kept my head down and I grinded. And now things are starting to change. And I'm really hoping that this season's coming to an end. But I think that is what I basically was doing, what you said, where I just was like, look, I want to make sure that I'm setting myself up so that when I do get married, we have something to do together, writing the books, starting the nonprofit, and even this podcast is part of it. And I think so many people, because it is hard to do that, it's they want to get the person before they get their purpose. And and I just think that's so common. But Is there any advice you would give to people on how to avoid that trap?
Yeah. First of all, very few men realize how sexy women find ambition. I've had sad situations in which women have said to me, I married this guy. He's the sweetest guy in the whole world. I married him because he was in ministry and he cared for people and he was sensitive. I could really see into his soul. And I said, great, good for you. Now what's the problem? He doesn't seem to have any ambition. You knew that. Yeah, but nobody told me it was important. I think many fathers are letting their daughters down today.
You don't think those women that married Donald Trump married him for his sensitivity?
I'll point out one thing. I know a lot of ex-wives, and most of them are filled with vitriolic hostility towards their former husbands. How come none of Donald Trump's former wives, are filled with hostility towards you? Not a single one was willing to run him down for political reasons. When last did you ever see that situation? I know that let's knock Donald Trump is a popular hobby in the United States of America, but on that particular area of marriage, I think it's very significant that they were not able, and don't think pressure was not brought to bear, because they would have loved to have some dirt on him from a former wife.
Oh,
so
sure.
people say he paid them off. No, he paid them off when he divorced them. That's called alimony. That's all done.
Yeah.
They have nothing to lose now. The bottom line is his ex-wives don't dislike him.
Yeah. I was in Israel a couple
conclusion.
I'm sorry, Rabbi. I was in Israel a couple of years ago, and he's very well liked over there, I noticed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for good reason.
Yeah, he's very pro-Israel. So I read the Bible Code a while back. Did you ever read that book when it came out?
Sure. I'm actually on one of the Bible Code books. I'm a blurb giver on the back cover.
Oh, wow. So it's a real thing.
It's a real thing that has been subjected to considerable distortion and sensationalism.
Okay.
So there are roots of reality in it, but a large part of the prophetic works that flow from that are rubbish.
Right. Okay. Because I read the first one, and I remember it was really struck me. And then the second one did seem a little far-fetched. For anyone out there that doesn't know it, basically they fed, was it the whole Testament or was it just the Torah?
Just the Torah.
Okay, just the Torah into some kind of computer. And basically it's predicted everything that's ever happened in the world, like all the big events. So
that's not true.
Okay.
Predicting means predicting. All they're doing is finding correlation post facto.
Right. Yeah.
But what they have not done is said, hey, in 2022, this is going to happen. And now, see, we predicted it. There's none of that happening. So that's a different story. Basically, it's not that mysteriously problematic to find subtle allusions to past events in an infinite volume. And so when you are free to define what constitutes a reference to an event that has happened in the past, the likelihood of being able to find such a reference on what's called the basis of skip, namely how many letters you skip before looking for a word, yeah, it doesn't really prove a whole lot. But that also doesn't mean that there is not real significance there as well.
What a lot of people don't know is that 25% of the Bible, I think, is prophetic prophecy, where somebody said, hey, this is going to happen. Maybe not the date, but they would say, for example, the Jews being gathered to their homeland. Like that was a prophecy thousands of years old. And
yeah, there are a lot of things like that. I actually saw one that predicted the invasion of Russia by Germany, which was hugely significant in 1941 when Germany sprang a surprise attack on Russia. That's probably what saved Jews in the world. There may be no Jews in the world if Hitler wouldn't have done that, because the likelihood is he would have won the war. Don't forget, America hadn't joined yet. That wasn't until December the 7th of that year. Very unlikely that America would have joined, very unlikely that Japan would have attacked, and Russia would have cleaned up Jews in the East. Germany would have cleaned up Jews in the West. What would have happened in the United States is not yet certain, is not certain. But bottom line is that moment, and nobody knows what got into Hitler's head, by the way. It made no sense. Like, to attack Russia late in the year, does the word Napoleon mean anything at all to him? That's what wiped out Napoleon in the year 1812. So how come in 1941 Hitler didn't say to himself, or how come his general staff in the Wehrmacht didn't say Führer. Just one moment. The Russian winter is pretty devastating. Our time to go would be about March,
Right.
Not in the fall.
Wow. Yeah. Makes you
So,
think.
there's mysterious reference to the word Barbarossa, which was the secret code name Hitler gave to the invasion of Russia in 41.
So let's talk a little bit about money, because I know that's a big topic that you cover. And obviously for singles or couples, it's huge. I think it's the number one thing people argue about, the couples, is money. And if you're hoping to be in a relationship.
And we've been saying it all along, that if you're a guy who's single, stop wasting your time dating, focus on your career. And then when you've broken through, you'll have your choice of high quality women.
Yeah.
And they are high quality. Only high quality women take finances into account. Sluts don't care.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So we have some motivation there. So you wrote some books.
Guys, by the way, guys are very misled by, oh, I want you to love me for me. What rubbish is that? What is there about you that's lovable? A guy is essentially what he has achieved. That's the definition of a man. Yeah. You are what you've done. And that's one of the reasons that God gives us a clue to that. In the very act of physical intimacy, it's the man who does all the work.
It's made a viral YouTube video, and one of the things I talked about is how you boil it down to the base, men want sex and women want security. Of course, I got pushback from people like feminists and stuff like that. Yeah, but I'm like, look, it's everywhere. You can't deny it. The number one, really the only customer in the sex industry is who? Men. Even if they're buying other men, it's only men paying for sex. Women don't pay for sex. Yeah. They can get all the sex they want. So like, it's undeniable.
And it's also, in spite of feminist attempts to try and depict it otherwise, the customers for pornography are all men.
Right. Yeah. I do believe that's probably spreading even to women just because of, I don't know, perverse.
I bet you're right about that. I haven't got any figures on it yet, but I bet you're right about that.
So you wrote a book called Thou Shalt Prosper, and it's the 10 Commandments for making money. Can you quickly tell us what those 10 Commandments are? Like, no, we have to buy the book. Okay. Give me your favorite.
I don't have a favorite. It's like asking which my children are my favorite. It's their entirety that make up the sum of my life. So similarly there, but I can certainly pick one that is very significant and very important. And that is, they're all important, but I'll pull one out of the hat. Believe in the dignity and morality of making money. Hugely important.
I heard you talk about that one. So you have to basically come to the point where you don't believe that having money is a bad thing. It's not evil.
Making money, yeah. The act of making money is good. In other words, you do not have to validate your morality by giving your money away, because whether you give it away or not, the act of making it is positive already in the first place.
Because you're adding value to people.
Exactly, yes. Because if you think about it, there really are only three ways to obtain money from other people's pockets and put it in your own. The quickest and most effective is a gun.
Right.
That's one way. The next best way is being the government and taking it away from them through taxation. Many people equate this to the first one, by the way. And the only other way, the third way, is by persuading people to reach into their pocket and giving you some of their money, because what you are giving them is worth more to them. That's the only other way of doing it. So by definition, you've done something for, you may be getting their money, but you've given them something of greater value because the transaction was totally consensual.
I heard you talk about that with Pat Robertson on 700 Club, and you said something along the lines of just get up every day and ask, who can you help, or how can I add value to the world? And if you do that, eventually, I guess it's going to come back, that you're going to be able to make money. But
not even eventually. If you find your best way of doing most good for most people. Look, a simple question: who's done more for more people, Bill Gates or Mother Teresa of Calcutta?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm going to have to go with Bill Gates just for sheer numbers, right?
No question, because I didn't say who God thought was saintlier.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure Mother Teresa is saintlier than Bill Gates. I got to guess.
I would hope so.
But that wasn't the question. The question was who's done more for most people.
Right. Yeah, the most people. Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay, one question, changing gears a little bit. How do we identify our Egypt, and how do we escape it?
Yeah. For the benefit of our audience, what you are referring to, Bob, here is a question that ancient Jewish wisdom asks about scripture. half the book of Exodus, a significant slice of the 5 books of Moses, is devoted to the details of what happened in Egypt and getting out of Egypt and the plagues and this and that. It's an unending saga that goes on for 30 chapters. It just keeps going. Why? If I were writing the book, if I was the publisher or the editor, I'd say, look, you know what, Moses, cut out all that stuff. What you should do is say the Israelites were slaves in Egypt for 400 years. God, with his faithful servant Moses, took them out by means of 10 plagues that wiped out the Egyptians, and the Israelites went off into the desert. And for those of you who don't have a life, all the details are in an appendix at the back of this book. But what's it doing in the book itself? Why is it that after doing it countless times, this year I'm going to go through the details of the story of the Exodus, just like I did last year, like I will next year? Why? And
can I try to take a stab at it?
Yeah, please do. I'd love that.
I believe there's so many parallels to that story to what God wants to do in every individual's life. If I look at my own life, before I met God, I was in slavery. Whether it was the sin, and then maybe it was to a job I hated because I was enslaved by the security of the money. And God called me out to the wilderness. And when I did it, it was just when they left, where it was unfamiliar, it was uncomfortable. There were things about Egypt I missed. I wanted to go back because there were cucumbers there or whatever. But the more I walked, the more things get by, like the more of the promised land I took over, and I had to trust God to do it. He had to provide and lead me, like with the fire and the cloud and all those things. I just see so many parallels, and I don't think people understand how significant that story is to every single person in the world. That's what God wants to do for everybody. Do you see that?
No, that's exactly right. In English, if I said, what's the meaning of the word Egypt, you'd shrug your shoulders. Doesn't mean anything. It's the name of a country in North Africa. But in Hebrew, the word for Egypt means a confinement, like a straitjacket. And so Egypt always in scripture means something that prevents you and obstructs you from reaching your divine destiny.
So good.
And it can be financial problems, it can be marriage problems, it can be pornography, it can be alcohol addiction, it can be drug, whatever it is that is stopping you from reaching your God-given destiny. That's Egypt. And now the book of Exodus is listing the tips and tools and techniques for getting out of your Egypt. And that's what it's really all about. For instance, just to give you one example of that, one of the things that happens is that God says on the 10th of this month, you must take a sheep, a lamb, and tie it up for 4 days. And on the 4th day, you have to slaughter it and barbecue it. Now, what's this ritual all about? It makes all the sense in the world if you know that the Egyptians worshipped sheep. Now, we know that already from when Joseph and his father arrive in Egypt in Genesis. You have to have a bit of a memory here so you know what's going on. And now God is saying, hey, Jews, tie up the sheep for 4 days. What do sheep do when you tie them up for 4 days? They bleat. They make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And so all the Israelites said, God, hey, could we tie up a lizard instead? Because tying up a sheep is going to make a lot of noise. Our Egyptian neighbors are going to hear what we're doing to their sheep. They're going to get good and mad at us. God says, don't make me repeat myself. Then he says, okay, now you got to slaughter this. 4 days later, you got to slaughter it. Oh boy, more noise. And then you got to barbecue it. Hey, God, is it okay if we just pressure cook it or we do it in an Instapot? No, it's got to be. Why? Because I want the smell of roast lamb chops to go all around the neighborhood. What are you trying to do to us, God? I'm trying to show you that if you want to get out of Egypt, you got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to overcome fear. That's all.
Wow.
And so that's true. Whatever your own Egypt is, getting out of it requires for you to move out of your comfort zone. Because if you can only do today exactly what you did yesterday, then your tomorrow will be just like today. You've got to be willing to overcome fear. You've got to look it in the eye and do something you've never done before. Because if you do exactly what you've done before, you'll have the same results, obviously. You're looking for better results. You got to do better things. That means overcoming fear.
Yeah. I think why God does that is because when you get outside of your comfort zone, I know in my own life, it was like I was so dependent on him to help me because I wasn't over my head. It wasn't something like I knew how to do or had enough of anything to do. So I'm like literally just praying all the time, please show up. I need you so bad. And that draws you close to him. And the number one, I've talked about this a few times. There was a book called Regrets of the Dying. The number one regret of people when they died was, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself. So they didn't have the courage. So what did they have? They had fear. And it's exactly what you said. They succumb to the fear. Fear comes from the enemy, not from God. So they listened to the devil instead of listening. God was saying, come on, step out of the boat. Come on, just trust me. And they were like just sitting there scared, and then they die. And then the number one regret of all humans is they didn't have the courage.
Absolutely. Yeah, makes sense.
It's so sad. Wow. How can we create wealth without sabotaging ourselves? That was just a question I typed out of really kind of personal reasons. I want to know, I know we kind of just talked about this, and if that's the answer, that's okay. Is there anything else that comes to mind when I ask that question?
I think you have to sit down in a very quiet room without your phone, without your computer, only you and a piece of paper and a pen. And you've got to write out some answers to the question of why would somebody phone me? I'll give you,
mean call you?
Yeah, I'll give you some examples. Why would anybody phone the Volvo Motor Company? Because they want safe family transport. Why would anybody phone Dunkin' Donut? I want an absolutely uniform, predictable coffee and pastry experience wherever I go. I want to know what happens when I walk into this pink brown store, and I'm going to maintain a consistently high level on the quality of the coffee, and the donuts are going to be standard and predictable. And yeah, that's why somebody would phone Dunkin' Donuts. Why would they phone me? That's an attempt at drilling down to the basic question of how can I serve other people?
Yeah.
When you've done that, all you got to do is befriend a whole lot of people and then tell them what you do. One of the reasons that Jewish last names always used to refer to what we did for our living. Goldsmith, silversmith, even blacksmith, right? It was a way of telling people that he shoed horses for a living. Or waterman was a water supplier, and so on and so forth. All these old Jewish names were all occupations because they were like walking around with a big business card stuck on your forehead. Hi, my name is Carpenter.
I love that. But that's
and so once you've established what it is, now, maybe all this exercise is going to do is help you identify that darn good to anybody. The time, if that happens, then you don't go into despair. You start figuring out now, what am I going to do for people? I'm not interested in what you like doing, because I like boating and nobody pays me to do that. It's irrelevant what you like doing. The question is, how can you best serve God's other children?
Yeah.
You know, and if it's being a carpenter, then you better go and learn how to be a carpenter. And if it's being a driver for Uber, then you better get on with doing that. But whatever it is, you better start doing it, because the best indicator that you are useful to God's other children is money flowing into your bank account.
Yeah, it's good. And that'll lead you to your customers too. I'll tell you who your ideal customer is. Yeah. So you have a book called America's Real War.
Yes.
And I've heard you talk a little bit about globalism, secularism. Is that, I haven't read the book, but can you tell us what is America's Real War?
Yeah, America's Real War it's most important to first of all know what it isn't. It's not a war between people with black skins and white skins. It's not a war between people with many dollars in their bank and people with no dollars in their bank. It's not a war between male and female, although plenty of people are trying to make it out to all of those things. But it's essentially a war between all those who see the Bible as God's indispensable message to mankind, without which we're not going to make it, and all the other folks who believe that the Bible and Judeo-Christian biblical values are nothing more than obstructions to what they call progress.
Yeah.
And there are people of different genders and different classes and different races on both sides, but that is the ultimate war in America. And unfortunately, 70% of self-identified Jews are on the wrong side in that war. And I explain why that is.
Yeah. It's crazy to me that because haven't we learned from the past? Because there were other times in history where there were like lots of different things that were going on in the world. And then we progressed to this point, America, arguably the greatest country in the history of the world. And then now people are saying, like, tossing those basic principles out that this country was built on, and just things that were in place for thousands of years, that all of a sudden they're just like, we're going to redefine that one. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just, sometimes I wonder who put these people in office, because there's some of the crazy, weird things that are coming across. Like, how do you see this playing out? As we like this, all this wokeism and secularism.
Remember, I'm not a prophet.
Socialism and all.
I think you can best get a sense of where things are going in the future by looking as to where they came from in the past. It's the same reason I tell women to look at a guy's track record. If you want to know what living with him is going to be like into the future, take a look back into the past, see what his relationship is with other people, with work people, with family people. And so how did we get here? There's something called spiritual gravity, Rob. What is spiritual gravity? Let's look at what physical gravity is. Physical gravity says that if I take a 50-gallon drum of water onto the roof of a garage and I roll it to the edge, it'll fall down. It won't just hang there. That's what physical gravity says. Spiritual gravity says that because human beings are intrinsically lazy and pleasure-seeking, that a large number of people in due course, without the rituals and restraints of religion, will tend to devolve towards people who don't want to work and want pleasure. And they will then become the legitimate prey of a group of other people who figured out that they can ride well on the backs of that crowd. It's called socialism. And what socialism does is it legitimizes people living on the sweat of other people's work. And because all my people have now become pleasure-seeking, lazy individuals, along comes a smooth-tongued politician who says, hey, let's redistribute the wealth. Let's make the rich pay their fair share. Let's make sure you can get free college, and let's make sure you get welfare and money. My answer is, hey, yeah. And somebody said, oh, watch out, they're going to take your freedom. Who cares about my freedom? I want security.
Because you're right, freedom and security are not, they're opposites.
They're opposites. You cannot have both at the same.
I've said this for a long time, and I've never said it on a public forum. Like, you look at these states like New York and California, and they have these outrageous taxes. I want to say it's in the 60% if you make over $400,000. I'm like, so that's criminal. You're going to 2/3 of your money goes to the government. And these are the people that did all the right things. They made all the right decisions.
It's actually much more than that, because no matter what you want to do, you have to pay government a licensing fee or a permit fee. If I want to become a hairstylist and start lifting myself out of the gutter by styling my neighbor's hairs, I have to pay a huge fee.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. That's a tax. That's another tax. Most people are totally unaware of how much tax goes into every gallon of gasoline. So if I want to drive to work, I'm being taxed on that as well. So the taxation factor is a hugely suppressing factor in economic growth.
That was one of the reasons I think people left England or whatever, was the excessive taxation. They came to America, and then originally the taxes were only supposed to be for, I want to say it was a small percentage and only for the super wealthy. And then
originally it was temporary. The amendment for taxation was really only because a war had to be fought, but the presumption was it would go away afterwards. Wise people at the time said taxes will never go away, so don't count on that.
Yeah, it's wild. So last but not least, I heard one of the things that you mentioned, and I think it was your podcast, where you talked about that the warmest feelings that a human being can experience comes from your close relationships with like family and friends
and God as well.
Yeah, it really reminded me of City Fam when I heard that. So any tips that you could give people because I feel like there's a lot of loneliness out there. Tons of people reach out to me that don't have any community, they don't have any tribe, and even people that of faith, that they go to church and they're just very lonely. And any suggestions or tips that you have for people?
So first of all, a lot of people, when I say what I'm about to say, many people respond by saying, Rabbi, I'm an introvert. I like being by myself. And to that I say, when you were a teenager and you had a face full of pimples, did you just go around introducing yourself as, hey, I'm a pimply guy, it's just who I am? No, you spent the equivalent of the gross domestic product of a small country on pharmaceuticals to try and clear up your face. You didn't accept that. Or if you break your arm, you just walk around in a car saying to folks, hey, you know what, I'm just a broken arm. No, you try to get it fixed. You're sick, brother, you're sick. Your desire to be alone, to be an introvert, that's not a normal condition. It's a bad condition for you. Solitary confinement is not a reward for busy people. It's a torture.
Yeah.
Number two, you can't succeed at anything that you cannot measure. If you want to lose weight, you need a scale and you need a calendar, and you need to record on the calendar your weight every day. Then you can, right? If you want to accumulate money and you can't read financial statements, you're going nowhere. You've got to be able to apply a metric to whatever it is you're trying to change. And the metric you need now, I would say to this person, is you need to count up your friends. The good news and the bad news is that it's much fewer than you think. It won't take you long.
I always say, if you find out, just move and see who shows up.
That's part of it. And the other part is phone somebody, leave a message and see how long it takes for them to call you back. And other than people you owe money to or other than family, you'll find that if you have 50 friends, you're doing pretty darn well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And
so you're saying measure
now
it.
You have to start making a commitment. Initially, make a commitment to make a new friend every month, but then change it to every week eventually. How do you do that? You have to introduce yourself to people. You have to go to places where there are people. You have to go to events. You have to go to activities. And you have to try and do things for people, do favors for people. You've basically got to increase the number of friends in your life. That's hugely important.
I love the idea of measuring it. I think that's so cool because anything that you measure increases. So if you set yourself a goal of one new friend a week, and then maybe you're like, okay, I'm gonna text or call somebody every day.
Yeah, that's right.
Or whatever.
Yeah, you've got to metricate it and work on that basis. It's a task. You have to improve your life, and just accepting that you are not connected to many people is a disaster. Why would you accept something like that?
Yeah,
makes no sense.
What you mentioned about solitary confinement, it's so true. There was a Harvard study, I don't know if it probably do, the oldest Harvard study, and the way to have a long, happy life was
connection.
It was all connection. It was all, and it was an 80-year-old study by Harvard. It wasn't even a faith-based study. But if you look at that, so you're saying on one end, you got the happiest life, but then if you look at the other end of a spectrum of connection, solitary confinement, what happens to those people? They go crazy.
They go nuts. Yes, that's quite right.
So community is where it's at. Somehow we're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And you got to have as many of those good connections as possible. And I do believe it's what you said, where I know. So I used to be a nightclub promoter before I met the Lord, and then after, actually, for a little while too. And I was very popular and I was having a lot of sex, but I remember how depressed I was. I was so lonely because nobody really knew me. I had a lot of people, they knew of me and they might've known my name, but I can remember just feeling so alone in a packed nightclub because the connections weren't deep, because I wasn't adding value to their lives and they really weren't adding value to my life either. And that is a very lonely existence.
Very, very much.
So I've loved talking to you, Rabbi. I just want
likewise, Rob. I love what you're doing, and I wish you Godspeed. I hope it grows, and I hope that the revenue multiplies many times, and that you decide to marry a good woman soon.
I'm going to do that exercise that you mentioned. So to learn more about the Rabbi's teachings and programs, please visit him at Rabbi Daniel Is it Lapin or Lapin? I'm sorry.
I say Lapin, but you'd be shocked to know what some people call me.
Okay, lapin.com. And you can also, I think you have a website called youneedarabbi.com. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
You can check them out there, but don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe. I'm going to actually announce a winner from the last episode to my New Year's Eve party, Charm City Countdown. Rabbi, you're close. You could come to I do the biggest New Year's Eve party in the area at the BWI Hilton.
You got to tell me about that. Please send me some information on that.
Absolutely. I'm sure there'll be some of the people that have seen this episode will be there. They would love to meet you. But yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure. It's really wonderful talking with you, Rob, and I appreciate all the things you are doing. Thank you.